a 389 cubic inch V8 smuggled past corporate headquarters inside a dealer option package for the Pontiac Tempest. That engine turned a forgettable mid-size coupe into the GTO, the car that invented the muscle car, and it only existed because John DeLorean found a gap in a rule that General Motors wrote to keep its own divisions from building fast cars. The displacement cap said 400 cubic inches maximum in any intermediate platform. Ford never had to follow it. Chrysler never cared. But inside GM, the rule held for years because the men on the 14th floor controlled every budget, every tooling allocation, and every promotion in the building. What followed was not obedience. It was one of the most creative campaigns of internal sabotage in automotive history. One engineer disguised a banned engine as a checkbox on a dealer order form. Another hijacked a fleet ordering system designed for police cars and taxi cabs. A third division painted its rebellion Saturn yellow and dared the front office to object. Here is how that single corporate memo accidentally created the GTO, the COPO Chevelle, and the Buick GSX. The rule came out of fear. By the late 1950s, the American automobile industry was caught between two forces. On one side, the car-buying public wanted speed. Drag strips were popping up in empty lots and abandoned airfields across the country. Teenagers were souping up flathead Fords in their driveways and racing them on back roads on Saturday nights. Hot rod culture had spread from the dry lakes of Southern California to every state in the Union. The National Hot Rod Association, founded in 1951, was sanctioning events in front of paying crowds, turning quarter-mile runs into a spectator sport with its own stars and its own language. The car magazines that lined every drugstore rack, Hot Rod, Carcraft, Motor Trend, ran cover stories on quarter-mile times the way sports pages covered batting averages. Detroit was feeding that appetite with bigger engines, more horsepower, and advertising that treated speed as a birthright. Chevrolet was selling small-block V8s to buyers who had never owned anything faster than a six-cylinder sedan, and those buyers were discovering what happened when you pressed the pedal to the floor. On the other side, the consequences were getting harder to ignore. Highway deaths were climbing every year. By the mid-1950s, traffic fatalities in the United States were approaching 40,000 per year, and a growing chorus of safety advocates, consumer groups, and politicians in Washington wanted to know why Detroit kept building cars that were faster than the roads they drove on. Congressional hearings were generating newspaper headlines. The industry needed to show that it could govern itself before Congress decided to do it for them. In 1957, the Automobile Manufacturers Association responded with a voluntary agreement. Every major automaker in the country signed it. The terms were straightforward: no factory-sponsored racing, no advertising that emphasized speed or horsepower, and no official participation in organized competition. The agreement was supposed to signal to Congress and the public that Detroit could regulate itself. It lasted about as long as a gentleman's handshake in a poker game. Ford broke the agreement within a few years. Henry Ford II decided that racing sold cars, and Ford Motor Company returned to the track with factory backing and factory dollars. Chrysler was not far behind. Its engineers had built the 426 Hemi specifically to win races, and no voluntary trade agreement was going to keep that engine on a shelf. Both companies treated the AMA agreement as a dead letter, and they were right. But General Motors, the largest corporation in the world at the time, held the line. Not because its engineers lacked ambition. The company held the line because its sheer size made it the most visible target in the industry. GM built roughly half of all cars sold in the United States. When something went wrong with a General Motors product, it made the national news. A young lawyer named Ralph Nader was already asking uncomfortable questions about automotive safety, questions that would eventually reshape the entire industry. In that climate, with regulatory scrutiny building and public opinion shifting, The last thing GM's leadership needed was a reputation for selling dangerously fast cars to young drivers on public roads. The men on the 14th floor of GM headquarters, the executive suite where corporate policy was set, looked at the landscape and made a calculation. Ford could afford to race because Ford was smaller and less politically exposed. Chrysler could build the Hemi because Chrysler was fighting for survival. General Motors could not afford any of it because General Motors had everything to lose. So they issued a memorandum from the general office to every division general manager. The rule was specific. No General Motors intermediate-sized car could be equipped with an engine displacing more than 400 cubic inches. Full-size cars were exempt. The Impalas, the Bonnevilles, the 98s could carry whatever power plant the division chose to offer. But the mid-size platforms, the Tempests and Chevelles and Skylarks and Cutlasses, the cars that younger buyers actually wanted, were capped. The reasoning had two layers. The first was public perception. Mid-size cars were lighter than full-size sedans, cheaper to buy, and more likely to end up on a drag strip or wrapped around a telephone pole on a Friday night. Putting a massive engine in one of those cars was, in the eyes of corporate management, an invitation to the kind of headline that ended in a hearing room. The second layer was internal politics. GM's divisions competed fiercely with each other. If Pontiac offered a mid-size car with an oversized engine, Chevrolet would want to match it. Then Buick would want to exceed it. Then Oldsmobile would demand its own version. The result would be an arms race that would drive up costs, attract negative attention, and hand ammunition to every regulator in Washington. The policy was never a law. It was never printed in any owner's manual, never filed with any regulatory body. It existed entirely as a corporate directive, communicated through internal memoranda, and enforced by the men who controlled the budgets, the tooling allocations, and the career trajectories of every division general manager in the company. There was no penalty clause. Defying the 14th floor meant a phone call from someone whose approval you needed for next year's budget, and that phone call was enough. A division general manager who publicly defied the displacement cap was risking his next allocation of capital spending, his next tooling budget, and ultimately his next promotion. For most of the early 1960s, that threat was sufficient. Every division stayed inside the line. They watched Ford drop a 427 into the Galaxy and take it to the track. They watched Chrysler put the 426 Hemi into the Plymouth Belvedere and dominate the Daytona 500. And they stayed inside the line because the alternative was a career-ending confrontation with the most powerful corporate office in the American automobile industry. Of all the divisions grinding against the displacement cap, Pontiac had the most at stake. Through the 1950s, Pontiac had been one of the dullest nameplates in Detroit. It sold wide, chrome-heavy sedans to middle-aged buyers who thought Chevrolet was too common but could not quite stretch to a Buick. The cars were reliable and respectable and forgettable. Market share was sliding. Nobody under 40 walked into a Pontiac showroom by choice. Pontiac was becoming the nameplate that grandparents drove, and in an industry obsessed with youth, that was a death sentence. That changed when Seaman Knudsen became the division's general manager in 1956. Knudsen was a second-generation GM man, the son of a former corporation president, and he understood something that the 14th floor had not fully grasped. Pontiac's survival depended on younger buyers, and younger buyers wanted performance. He stripped the chrome off the cars, widened the track for better handling, and started entering Pontiacs in stock car races under the NASCAR banner. The transformation was not cosmetic. Knudsen changed the engineering philosophy of the entire division. He wanted Pontiacs to handle as well as they looked, and he hired people who could make that happen. Among the engineers he brought in was a tall, ambitious man named John Zachary DeLorean, who had come from the Packard Motor Car Company and rose through the ranks at Pontiac to become chief engineer before he turned 40. DeLorean was brilliant, restless, and uninterested in corporate protocol. He wore his hair longer than the other executives. He drove sports cars. He dated actresses. He was exactly the kind of person that the conservative GM culture had not produced before, and exactly the kind of person Pontiac needed. By the early 1960s, Pontiac had reinvented itself so completely that industry observers called it the most dramatic turnaround in Detroit. The wide-track advertising campaign had given the brand a visual identity that buyers could recognize from across a street. Pontiac drivers were winning NASCAR races. The division had climbed from 6th place in industry sales to 3rd, but the displacement cap sat on all of that momentum like a ceiling that nobody could raise. Pontiac had a 389 cubic inch V8, one of the best engines in the GM stable, already going into its full-size Catalina and Bonneville. DeLorean and his team wanted to put that same engine into the Tempest, Pontiac's intermediate platform. The Tempest was lighter, more agile, and exactly the kind of car that younger buyers were asking for. Corporate headquarters said no. The answer came back through channels, firm and unambiguous. The Tempest was classified as an intermediate. The 389 exceeded the displacement limit. DeLorean could find a smaller engine, or he could drop the idea entirely. DeLorean chose a third option that the men who wrote the policy had never considered. His breakthrough was not mechanical, it was bureaucratic. The displacement policy applied to car models. If Pontiac submitted a proposal for a new model built around the 389, the 14th floor would kill it before the first prototype left the shop. But the policy had a gap. It controlled what models the divisions could produce. It did not control, with the same rigor, what options a dealer could install on an existing model. DeLorean assembled a small team. Bill Collins, Pontiac's chief engineer, handled the technical side, making sure the 389 could physically fit in the Tempest platform without requiring changes that would draw corporate attention. Jim Wangers, a young advertising man working with Pontiac's agency, handled the other half, figuring out how to sell a car that the corporation had not officially approved. Together, they proposed something deceptively simple. They would take the Tempest Le Mans, a perfectly ordinary mid-size coupe that nobody at corporate worried about, and offer the 389 cubic inch V8 as a dealer-installed option package. The package would include the big engine, a Hurst-shifted 4-speed manual transmission, heavy-duty suspension, dual exhaust, and a few cosmetic upgrades. They called it the GTO, a name borrowed from Ferrari's Gran Turismo Omologato without asking permission. The option package structure was the key to everything. Because the GTO was not a new model, it bypassed the level of corporate sign-off that a new nameplate would demand. On paper, it was simply a Tempest Le Mans with some boxes checked on the order form. The reality was a car producing around 325 horsepower in a body that weighed roughly 3,100 pounds, a combination that could embarrass most things on the road. Pontiac initially planned to build around 5,000 units for 1964, a number small enough to be dismissed as an experiment if headquarters objected. The market disagreed. The GTO sold so fast that dealers could not keep them in stock. Automotive magazines put it on their covers. By the end of the model year, Pontiac had moved more than 32,000 GTOs, over 6 times the original estimate. The 14th floor noticed. The executives who had imposed the policy now faced a choice: shut down one of the most profitable option packages in the entire corporation, or quietly concede that the rule had been outmaneuvered. They chose the path of least resistance. The GTO was allowed to continue, and in 1966 it was promoted from an option package to a standalone model. The GTO also proved something that no corporate memo could have predicted. Before the GTO, there was no recognized category called the muscle car. There were fast cars, and there were mid-size cars, but nobody had named the idea or built a business model around it. The GTO proved that tens of thousands of buyers wanted exactly this: a mid-size car with a big engine at a price below a Corvette. Within 2 years, Ford had the Mustang GT, Chrysler had the Roadrunner, and American Motors was scrambling to compete. The muscle car era had a birth date, and it started with a Pontiac engineer who read the corporate rulebook more carefully than the men who wrote it. If DeLorean's trick was elegant, Chevrolet's approach was brazen. Chevrolet had engineers who wanted big engines in mid-size cars just as badly as Pontiac did, and the most determined among them was Vince Piggins. Piggins was a former Hudson engineer who had come to Chevrolet with a deep belief that performance cars sold regular cars. He ran Chevrolet's Performance Products Group and had spent years watching Pontiac grab headlines with the GTO while Chevrolet's own Chevelle stayed dutifully within the displacement cap. Piggins found his path through an obscure internal mechanism called the Central Office Production Order, known inside GM as COPO. The COPO system existed for fleet customers. Police departments, taxi companies, and government agencies sometimes needed vehicles built to specifications that the standard catalog did not offer. A police department might need a sedan with a heavy-duty cooling system and a reinforced frame. A taxi company might need a bench seat with vinyl upholstery that could survive 100,000 miles of passengers. The COPO process bypassed the normal model approval pipeline because these were supposed to be small-volume, special-purpose builds that the marketing department never needed to know about. Piggins used the COPO system to order Chevelle equipped with 427 cubic-inch big block engines. On paper, the orders looked like fleet requests. In reality, they were street-legal drag machines with power plants that violated the displacement policy outright. The COPO Chevelles were built in small numbers, a few hundred across the years they were produced, and distributed through a network of performance dealers who knew exactly what they were buying. The most prominent of those dealers was Don Yenko in Canonsburg, Pennsylvania. Yenko had been building his own high-performance Chevrolets by hand-swapping engines at his dealership, a labor-intensive process that limited how many cars he could turn out in a season. The COPO system changed all of that. Yenko could now order the cars pre-built from the factory with the 427 already installed, ready to sell the day they rolled off the transport truck. He applied his own Yenko badges and sold them as Yenko supercars, a brand within a brand that carried its own reputation among performance buyers. The COPO pipeline also produced a run of COPO Camaros with the same 427 big block cars that were far too powerful for the compact Camaro platform by any reasonable standard, and that was exactly the point. These were purpose-built machines for the dragstrip, wearing license plates as a formality. The COPO Chevelles and Camaros were never advertised nationally. No television commercials, no glossy magazine spreads. The cars existed in a shadow market, known to drag racers, performance dealers, and a tight community of enthusiasts who tracked the COPO order codes the way collectors track serial numbers. Word spread through the back channels of the performance world. Conversations at drag strips, tips from dealership mechanics, coded references, and classified ads. The secrecy was a survival strategy. The less attention the program drew from the 14th floor, the longer Piggins could keep the pipeline open. By the late 1960s, the displacement policy had become a polite fiction. Pontiac was selling GTOs by the tens of thousands. Chevrolet was building COPO cars through the back door. The remaining divisions decided that if the rules were not being enforced, there was no reason to keep following them. Oldsmobile had introduced the 442 in 1964, the same year as the GTO. The name was a spec sheet compressed into 3 digits, a 400 cubic inch engine, a 4-barrel carburetor, and dual exhaust. The early 442 was fast but still technically within the displacement limit. By the end of the decade, Oldsmobile had dropped the pretense entirely. The W30 performance package turned the 442 into a car that could run mid-14-second quarter miles out of the box, a number that would have made most purpose-built drag cars from the previous decade look slow. The intake system used ram air ducting that forced cold air directly into the carburetor, giving the engine more power than the standard version, and Oldsmobile engineers tuned the camshaft for higher revs than any previous production Olds engine had ever seen. Buick went further. In 1970, the division that had spent decades cultivating an image of quiet luxury released the GSX. It came standard with a 455 cubic inch engine, well beyond the old 400 cubic inch cap, producing some of the highest torque figures of any American production car. The official number was 510 pound-feet, enough to spin the rear tires through second gear on dry pavement. Buick painted them in Saturn yellow and Apollo white, colors designed to be seen from across a parking lot. The GSX was not a workaround, it was open defiance. The Corvette program moved as well. Zora Arkus Duntov, the engineer who had shaped the Corvette since the 1950s, had always pushed for maximum performance. The shifting corporate mood allowed his team to produce variants like the L88, a 427-powered Corvette that Chevrolet deliberately underrated on paper to discourage casual buyers. The cars came with no heater, no radio, and a warning on the window sticker that the vehicle was not intended for street use. The displacement policy had not been formally repealed. Nobody had issued a memo rescinding it. It had simply stopped functioning, the way a dam stops functioning when every tributary has found its own way around. The 14th floor, confronted with a company-wide rebellion that was also generating enormous profits, made the only choice that a profit-driven corporation could make. It chose silence. The men who had written the rule quietly accepted that the rule no longer mattered. In 1970, General Motors officially retired the displacement restriction. The result was exactly what the 14th floor had spent a decade trying to prevent. Every intermediate in the lineup could now be ordered with an engine well over 400 cubic inches. The Chevelle SS came with a 454. The GTO offered a 455. Buick and Oldsmobile had their own 455s. For one model year, there were no limits at all, and the divisions went all in. Horsepower wars between GM's own brands produced some of the most powerful street cars ever to roll off an American assembly line. The freedom lasted roughly 18 months before the world closed in from every direction at once. The insurance industry had been quietly studying accident data on high-performance cars, and the numbers told a story that no actuary could ignore. Young men who bought muscle cars crashed them at rates that made the underwriting math unsustainable. Insurance companies responded with surcharges so steep that they fundamentally changed the economics of ownership. A driver under 25 who walked into an insurance office with the title to a Chevelle SS 454 could discover that the annual premium rivaled the monthly car payment. Some policies for big block cars cost more per year than the sticker price of an economy sedan. Dealers started reporting a new phenomenon: buyers who could afford the car but could not afford to drive it off the lot. Showroom traffic for the highest horsepower models dropped sharply, and unsold muscle cars began sitting on dealer lots where they had once been spoken for before they arrived. At the same time, federal emissions regulations were beginning to strangle the engines. The Clean Air Act of 1970 set targets that required lower compression ratios, catalytic converters, and the phase-out of leaded gasoline. The big high-compression V8s that powered the muscle car era were exactly the engines that could not meet the new standards. By 1972, every manufacturer in Detroit was detuning its engines, switching from gross to net horsepower ratings, and watching the advertised numbers drop. A big block that had once boasted figures north of 400 horsepower was suddenly rated in the low 200s. Not because the engine had changed dramatically, but because the measurement had, and because the tuning compromises required to pass emissions testing stole real power from the crankshaft. The muscle car era ended not with a corporate directive from the 14th floor, but with a collision of market pressure, government regulation, and economic reality that no single company could have stopped. The irony runs deeper than timing. The rule GM wrote to keep its muscle cars slow never slowed anything down. It accelerated everything. Without the cap, Pontiac would have simply put a big engine in the Tempest and sold it as another option in the catalog. It would have been one more horsepower number on one more spec sheet, unremarkable and quickly forgotten. There would have been no creative workaround, no option package dodge, no GTO legend, no proof of concept that launched an entire market segment. Without the Copo backchannel, Chevrolet would never have built the shadow cars that collectors pay 6 and 7 figures for today. The Yenko Camaros, produced in numbers small enough to count on a few hands, would never have existed at all. The cap turned a simple engineering question into an act of defiance, and defiance made the cars legendary. The rule created the pressure created the ingenuity, and the ingenuity created the cars that people remember. Every car that came out of those workarounds, the GTO, the COPO Chevelle, the Yenko Camaro, the Buick GSX, exists today because someone inside General Motors decided that building the car they believed in mattered more than following the corporate rulebook. DeLorean found a loophole in the option sheet. Collins made the engine fit. Wangers figured out how to sell it. Piggins hijacked a fleet ordering system meant for cop cars and taxis. Buick painted its rebellion Saturn yellow and dared the front office to say something about it. Duntov built Corvettes so fast that Chevrolet had to lie about the horsepower to keep casual buyers from killing themselves. None of them asked permission. None of them waited for the 14th floor to change its mind. They just built the cars, and half a century later, the cars they built in defiance of that directive are the ones that collectors still chase, that crowds still gather around at weekend shows, and that people who never owned a muscle car can still name by heart. The policy that was supposed to contain these cars is a footnote in corporate history. The cars themselves are the legacy. One internal memo against an entire generation of engineers who refused to build slow cars. They found loopholes, exploited fleet systems, and painted their defiance in colors loud enough to see from the far end of a dealer lot. The 14th floor lost that fight before it even knew the fight had started. There is another story like this one on screen right now. Hit subscribe if you have not already. I will see you in the next one.